Well, it's official. So remember a few weeks ago I talked about how Black Widow, and all the MCU films as well, West Side Story, Death on the Nile, all got delayed, and like I said, Wonder Woman got delayed till Christmas. And so here's kind of this sort of this. So and now Bond has been delayed, and subsequently after that was the what's the straw. Bond getting delayed was the straw that broke the camel's back to Regal closing down its theaters in the U.S. And Cineworld, which is the parent company, closing down their theaters um, in the UK, which is crazy. But let's kind of go in the steps in order. So here's kind of the theater timeline during this pandemic. Okay, theaters opened in other countries, not the U.S. In other countries about mid June. The theaters started the process of reopening in mid June. And then here, and that for the most countries, very successful. But here in the U.S., where cases were going up, it took probably about late July when theaters start to open. And the thought process was, okay, we're going to start the theaters open. We're going to get the theaters open. And we're going to play great classic films to get people coming back in the theaters, to get people used to coming back to theaters without a studio having to throw a new film that'll ultimately lose money. So like they'll play, I just saw Empire Strikes Back, and they'll play Back to the Future and Lord of the Rings and Godfather and all these great classic films that are beloved decades and decades and decades. And so they'll do that. They'll play the classic films to get people back in theaters, to get them aware that the theaters are open, then play Tenet, and that might not do very successful, but it'll get people back to the theaters, and it'll be a great leeway into Black Widow, Wonder Woman, Bond, where each film does more successful, till when we get to 2021, where everything's normal in terms of people going back to the theaters. That was the plan, and the plan is not perfect. In the sense that, yes, Tenet is not going to make the potential. No film coming out in 2020 they knew was probably not going to make the potential. But the thought process is, let's get them out. Let's get people back in the theaters so that later in our calendar schedule for films, we can really build up so that the longer we hesitate to put our films out there, the more it'll cost us in the future. Because 2021 was booked before the pandemic, so think about that too. But then what happened? Tenet didn't do great. I mean, it did as successful as anybody would have thought Tenet would have. But that wouldn't have been good enough. So what ended up happening was Tenet did pretty bad. It had to make like $500 million to break even. It just crossed the $300 million mark. So it wasn't a big hit at all. And then you think of, but then once the studio saw Tenet was supposed to be the first penny in the water, but it didn't really work out it worked out how they would have thought, but not what they would have hoped. Well, they think at its best, break even. At its worst, this around this range. You know what I mean? Or not at its worst, but at its average about this. This is what they expected, not what they hoped, type thing. So they were like, 300 million? That's not gonna cut it for Wonder Woman, for Black Widow, for Bond, for yada 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 yada. And so what happened? They're like, yeah, we're pulling our films from the release schedule. So first was Wonder Woman. They're like, okay, let's pull it back to Christmas. Okay. But then Disney, like a week ago, pulled Black Widow, Death on the Nile, West Side Story, and by pushing Black Widow back, they pushed every single MCU back film by a couple of months as well. But the thing is, another thing to note is how far some of these films got pushed back. West Side Story, because it's an Oscar contender, got pushed back a full year, and Black Widow got delayed 6 months, meaning it was delayed. delayed a full year from its original release date. Then you think of Wonder Woman. It moved from October to December, which was only a couple of months, only about, 3 or 4 months, but still 3 or 4 months that theaters still will have to struggle to survive. So now you're at the state where, okay, Black Widow's, pretty much out of the, basically out of the market. Wonder Woman, for the meantime, out of the market. Every MC film doesn't really equate right now, but Death of Nile pushed back a couple months to December, I think, or November maybe, I don't know, but and you start to see more and more films getting delayed, to the point of we're getting close to that zone where, at a normal, not normally, but what was supposed to happen was we're getting into October, where Wonder Woman was supposed to come out like next week, and then Black Widow was supposed to come out from like I think a month from today, and then you think of Bond and all that stuff, but the reality was theaters were like, we'll lose money to keep our theaters open than we would if we closed them. Because the reality is, it costs them to stay in business. The hope is that the cost to stay in business is less. The greater. It costs them to stay in business, but the hope with every business is it's going to cost you to stay in business. Any business, it's going to cost you to build a restaurant. But the hope is that the amount of customers you get at a restaurant would be more than the cost to make the restaurant. Same thing with movie theaters. The cost to pay your employees, the cost of paying the advertisement companies. You're hoping that the cost of that will be less than the value of everybody coming back to the theater. So the reality is, it costs them more to keep the theaters open. So at this point, if you were looking at the theaters staying open, their hope would be, okay, we'll struggle for the next few months, but hopefully when Bond comes out and Soul comes out in November, everything will hopefully come back to normal. But what happened? Bond got delayed till April 2021. So now you have theaters being like, so you're telling me at the very least we have to wait till December? Another, October? We're practically at the beginning of October. So October, November, December. That's still another 2 months in between. Practically 3 months. About 2 months in between, but practically 3 months before really Free Guy in December 11th, which the trailer just dropped, I think looked pretty cool. Anyways, staying on point. So they're like, we'll have to wait till December, another 2 months, where we have nothing to show. In classic films, like I said, I went to Empire Strikes Back. There was like one other family there in the entire theater. That's not gonna cut it. It would have cut it when in the hopes of getting people back in the theaters in time for Tenet, in time for Wonder Woman. But the reality is that's not gonna happen. So they can't rely on classic films. That was never gonna make money in current circumstances. It's great for like a 20-year anniversary re-release or something like that, but it's still not gonna cut what needs to be done. It's not gonna cut that. It's not gonna cut it. It's not gonna make the money that theaters need to make it worthwhile to stay open. And so Regal's like, okay, we're closing our theaters down. And the tricky thing is with me is Regal is the close, and it's temporary. But when does temporary become permanent? You know what I mean? I'll get to that. Because Regal is the theaters around me. You know what I mean? AMC is the biggest theater chain, I think, in the world, I believe. Regal and I believe, no, actually I think it's AMC's the biggest theater chain in the US, I believe. Maybe it's the world, but I'm pretty sure US. Regal, Cineworld second. Cineworld is Cineworld is the parent company of Regal. So anyways, but Regal is the closest theaters around me. I mean, there's sure there's AMC's around, but mainly there's Regals, and I have like the Regal Unlimited Pass and whatever, and stuff like that. Credit to the different theaters, and I go there a lot. I've some great experiences in these different Regal theaters. And so the point is it's like, okay, basically taking Regal out of the equation, you're basically just waiting on AMC and Cinemark and Landmark to close down soon, because it's like whenever one of these big theater chains does something, it's usually other chains will follow suit, because that's the reality of it. Because when it's like a domino effect. Because, for example, let's look at this in the perspective of Soul, which is still coming out in theaters in November. I personally believe it'll delay. It'll get delayed after this news, because when Disney last week said they're gonna committed to having that Soul November release date, they didn't know that Regal was gonna push their theaters. But it's kind of a domino effect, in this where one film, next film got delayed. Then Regal decided to temporarily cut it or close its doors. But why is that a domino effect? Because now Soul is in this position of, okay, Soul, so here's why AMC will and all these other theater chains will close, because they know Soul will definitely not play in theaters if one of the biggest movie theater chains is closed. So if Soul moves, then that's the nail in the coffin to every theater as far as needing to temporarily close, because they can't wait another 2 months of nothing. They just can't. There's no reason. So thought process is they have to close the doors because they know Soul will not afford to stay in theaters since Regal moved. So there's definitely a lot of components. So I do expect within the next couple of weeks, within the week, Soul will get delayed, then theaters will close, and then honestly, I'm predicting December films will get delayed. So I don't know. But anyways, stay tuned for more videos coming right at you.